Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. As you begin to join, please feel free to share in the chat where you're joining in from. We'll give a couple seconds for everybody to start joining in before we kick off. We have a fantastic session ahead of us, and I'm extremely excited for the next 45 minutes. Wonderful. I can see people trickling in. Hello, everybody. We have people dialing in from San Francisco, from Barcelona, from the UK and London. Good morning. And then good morning in San Francisco. Good afternoon in Barcelona. Caleb, your time zone being represented, and Spain equally being represented. We have people joining in from Canada. Welcome. Wonderful. So let's kick off. Welcome to another session of the CFO Days. I'm your host, Max 𝐂𝐅𝐎, the Chief of Staff at Abacum, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome all of you. I am incredibly excited for today's session and the agenda that we have prepared for this panel. A little bit of context on the event. CFO Days is our online event for finance leaders to connect, share, and exchange on the most important topics influencing and impacting the finance world. Our agenda for the coming days includes 3 days of panel discussions and fireside chats with the participation of some of the most impressive finance professionals. Today's panel will be 45 minutes, and we're going to be covering how technology is transforming the CFO office. The conversation will be split into 2 parts. A panel conversation on the role of technology and how CFOs and finance leaders can evaluate and multiply their impact, followed by an audience Q&A. So please, as we go through the panel, share your questions, and then we'll make sure to cover those towards the end. So let's kick off. Yvonne and Caleb, it's a true privilege to have you on stage with us today. Yvonne, why don't you give the audience a brief overview of who you are and your role as a startup CFO and advisor?
Okay. Well, thank you, Max, and thank you, Abacum, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and speak with you today. And let's see, my background, I actually have an undergrad in accounting and MBA in management information systems. I'm also a certified public accountant. So just reflecting on the previous conversation, I come from the stream that was more focused on the accounting and controlling side in the early days of my career. I got recruited by General Motors straight out of university, and I spent several years actually in the automotive industry. But this was a good, let's say, foundation for me because I was exposed to things like the 5S, the 5Y, the A3 methodologies that help build, kind of a planning foundation that's helped me a lot in my career, and it translates very well into the software fields and the tech fields. So that's been very beneficial for me. I was an expat for a while in Italy. And after returning to the States, that's when I transitioned from manufacturing to more of the tech side. And then about 8 years ago, I had the chance to come live in Spain. And that's where I've been ever since, primarily focused in e-commerce and SaaS startups. And yeah, truly enjoying the side of the table.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. It's fantastic to have you. Caleb, now on to you. You're also a longtime friend of Abacum. We've had many of this panel conversations preparing for it and also discussing a myriad of different finance topics. You want to give the audience a little bit of context on who you are and OpenBale Group?
Sure. Thanks, Max. And thank you, Abacum, as well. My name is Caleb Maxson. I'm the CEO and founder of OpenBale Group, and been working with finance technology in different forms for the last 15 years or so. I started my career with Hitachi and Alvarez & Marsal. I then spent some time in software with Anaplan, and then transitioned in-house into finance leadership roles with DocuSign and Sunrun. A few years ago, I went back to get my MBA at UCLA Anderson, and around that time founded OVG. And we focus on providing business value engineering services to our clients, helping them get the most out of their technology investments. So, of course, it probably goes without saying, I'm a huge fan of technology. I'm a huge fan of the force multiplying effect it can have, especially on finance organizations. So very happy to be part of this conversation today.
Thank you so much to you both for joining. And then let's start trickling into sort of the first talking point of today. So both of your backgrounds, you've been able to see how the CFO has evolved from accounting and controlling to really driving a lot of those cross-functional strategic business insights. Over the course of both of your impressive careers in finance, you've been able to see the transformation of the CFO office. I guess drawing from those personal experiences, what do you believe are the reasons behind that shift, and what role has data or technology played in it? Yvonne, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Well, I think that the shift has largely been enabled by the need to be a partner to the business, to align with the business, to bring value and let's say anticipation of what will be the needs of the business in order to fuel the growth of the business, in order to anticipate some indicators of where the business is going so that you know where to invest. And so really out of necessity, you have to transform the role of finance from crunching the data into using the information that's coming from that system to provide support to the business and guidance to the business about where to go. And so when I think about some of the experiences in my own career that have enabled that, it's been even way back in the day, using an Access database to reduce the amount of time to crunch the data, so that instead of pointing out very minute things to the business stakeholders of what say was happening in the business or what happened in the business, we're instead speaking about what should be done to optimize the process, or what is the person, who's the stakeholder, maybe your counterpart in another department, what's important to them, so that you gain an understanding of each other, you align with each other, and you can move forward together and accomplish the business objectives.
That's a fantastic answer, Yvonne. And something that I reflect a lot about is one of the best ways to drive alignment in a business is to make sure that everybody is talking about the same metrics. And to get everybody talking about the same metrics, you got to look at, does everybody have the same data and is operating with the same assumptions? Caleb, from your own experiences, what have you drawn, and how have you seen this transformation and evolution of the finance function?
Yeah, so I agree with many of Yvonne's points there. I think what we see with many of our growth stage clients, and even with some larger ones as well, is a pretty dramatic expansion of the office of the CFO and the responsibilities. And that includes the strategic business partnering, and I think goes even further in some cases into actually taking over some of the responsibilities that would previously have been the COO or the CIO. I think companies are realizing, businesses are moving so fast now and evolving so quickly that to really keep up that pace, they need the operational and the technology stories, the operational and financial stories to be really tied at the hip. From both a planning perspective, but also an execution perspective as well. And to do that, they also need the technology and the data infrastructure to match that as well. So you end up needing areas from each of those, the CFO office, the CO office, and the CIO office kind of all combined into one. And in terms of the technology trends that are driving this, one is definitely the move to the cloud, which has been happening for some time now. It's really made big data accessible to everyone. And it allows companies to act on that data and collect it. Another one is more powerful planning solutions like Abacum that are even more sleek and more powerful than they have been before. It's interesting, those tools have made FP&A especially very important data stewards within organizations, because they're sometimes the only team with full purview over both operational and financial data, and both backward-looking and forward-looking. So in some cases, they're the only ones who have access to those insights and that level of detail. And then the third is this, continued the rise and the continued evolution of low-code and no-code platforms, which Abacum falls into the realm of as well. They've reduced reliance on IT. They've empowered the business But at the same time, though, I think those have also come along with they've also put a lot more pressure and a lot more responsibility on the business and operations team to understand enterprise architecture and how to build the right way. So I think there's a confluence of factors happening and a consolidation of management and technology responsibility. And a lot of that is naturally falling on the office of the CFO.
Fantastic insights. And this reminds me of a quote that I heard not so long ago, in which the easiest way to understand if you have a modern finance function is to look at who is your data team reporting into. And I guess this is also seen by, that trend in which we're seeing finance operators, finance professionals, not only shifting away from knowing how to master Excel with a keyboard and not having to use them out, but also getting familiar with SQL, Python. And then, Yvonne, you have a background in information systems. You know this better than anybody, right? And data architectures becoming very important.
Yes, so, an understanding of the architecture. And I think Caleb made a good point as well, that finance has the unique position to have, more than surface level view into what's happening in every department. So we know, what is on the horizon for the engineering team, who's coming and going in terms of people resources, what is the marketing team focused on. And so, I see the finance role, the CFO role, evolving a lot to not only, be kind of the coach and aligning those teams, but as a good candidate to move into the COO position or even the CEO position.
I've heard that from CFO and COO, right? And then I think that if we also look at some of the profiles in some of the public companies, we've seen that as becoming a very popular move. A little bit off topic. How do you imagine those two roles coexisting with each other, or the CFO with the CIO, right? As we start thinking about the data being intertwined.
Is that one for me?
Caleb, Yvonne, whoever.
I can respond to this one. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think there's a balance there. At smaller or mid-sized companies, I think that can sometimes be the same role, just because the level of complexity and scale isn't quite there yet. When it gets to larger companies that might be $1 billion or multi-billion dollars in revenue, it gets trickier. And I think at some point you do need the division of responsibility there. But at the top, you really want that really tight alignment and tight trust between the leadership, so then the rest of the organization falls in line with that.
Yes, I think it's, similar to what was said in the previous session as well. When you are in the very seed stages, or maybe even the Series A stage, you can still maybe easily or without too much pain, let's say, wear the many hats and fill the many roles. But just as, your tools need to evolve for the business, also you have to reach a stage where you have this trust with the team, and then the self-awareness of when you need to get out of the way of the continued growth of the company as well.
Thank you so much for the answer that's there, and talking about the evolution also of tech, right? We've seen that tech landscape evolving daily. The three of us are very close to that evolution. And very often a question that is not asked enough when talking about the finance tech stack is for which finance team, or at what stage of a finance team. Caleb, Yvonne, do you believe there is such a thing as the right tech stack?
I don't think there can be a right tech stack for a particular company, but I wouldn't say that there is a right tech stack that can be applied universally across companies, because you have to consider, for example, the industry, the team composition, and one thing I talk a lot with my own teams about is what problem are you trying to solve? So, is the solution going to address what our needs are, what our goal is, where we are going as a company? Is it something that we are doing because we're familiar with it? But there has to be a good evaluation and assessment to make sure that the tool is actually helping us achieve the business strategy.
Completely agree with that notion as well. I think there is no one finance tech stack, and sometimes I think companies will get in trouble when they're like, "Hey, our peer has that, so I should probably have that too," and they don't consider how their their business operates differently or how their team is structured differently. A few principles that we like to coach our clients on is, one, to keep it simple. So complexity, only use it unless if there's an actual need to do so. And that includes introducing new tech as well. 2, if you do have to introduce new tech, really making sure that those systems talk to each other. Now, when you're sending data between them, that you can actually trace that, or else it creates a problem in silo data. And then from a finance perspective, sometimes instead of optimizing maybe for what's best for finance, optimizing for what's best for the business, sometimes that can pay dividends and reduces siloing that sometimes happens when teams are too inwardly focused on what their own team needs.
Yes, I think that the CFO has a good opportunity to play the gatekeeper as well, to ensure the resources of the company are being used in a productive way, and also it's a good time to reflect and say, yeah, we can build this tool ourselves. For example, we can build an integration between these two systems that we have, maybe the accounting system and the CRM system. But, is that where we want to focus our energy? And, if we are in a completely different product realm, maybe we hire out that particular function and we are up and running faster. So I think the CFO can help guide a lot of those conversations and make sure that everyone is aligned.
I think this connects back to what both of you were saying, right? Yvonne, you labeled it as gatekeepers. Caleb, you've talked about it as finance being the connective tissue of the organization. And the role that you have as a connective tissue is sending signals of, hey, have we really thought about this problem? Is this really where we should be focusing? Is this where we want to say yes? Is this where we want to say no? And then orchestrating that at big scale. Then you mentioned something that I want us to unpack a little bit around. Most teams are inward facing. How are you coaching, or how are you in your own operating roles making that transition, or have made that transition and shifted the team from looking inwards to looking outward?
Yeah, so we see this a lot with a lot of our clients. Frankly, the challenge is not so much technology based, but folks just simply are not talking to each other. And that's where the finances connective tissue comes into play. When everybody is running 100 miles an hour and they're focused on executing at the highest level their specific areas, sometimes there's just not enough time for people to sit down and just say, hey, like, how are things going in sales? Or, hey, how are things going in marketing? What are you working on? What challenges are you facing? And those are the conversations that finance can help to facilitate in that business partnership role. And sometimes those will reduce or even eliminate the need when people are like, hey, we need to build some type of tech integration. It's like, no, maybe you just need some type of standing touch base once a month to make sure that information is getting through.
So. Agree. And along that line, keeping in mind that finance often has more visibility than other teams might have, it's a good way to ensure that everyone is moving in the same direction. So if someone in engineering, for example, wants to invest like in a certain payment processing system that's maybe very popular in one region, but the company has plans to invest, through M&A or some other process in another region, it's a good opportunity to make sure that the global or holistic perspective is taken into account, so that there's not a kind of a waste of energy or something that may need to be redone or recast in the future.
I mean, as you know, it's finance playing the role of finance, right? Which is allocating resources in the most effective way. And sometimes, resources are trying to solve the same problem in two completely different ways. And this is the opportunity of communicating across and saying, hey, this is the one problem that we have, and we all address it and we solve it collectively.
Yes, with flexibility and scale.
Exactly. So in the past, a lot of tech stack decisions have been made on the premise of optimizing for finance KPIs, right? So if we look at how decisions were being made, it was a lot about inward looking. What are my finance KPIs? The definition of that ROI is changing, and it's no longer, your expense processing time or your accounts payable turnover. With that context of finance having to start thinking more about the business, how do you assess the need or request for a new tool or process?
Yeah, when we think about technology investment, what we really push, one tenet that we really push with clients is to think about value. So not necessarily KPIs or even dollars, but value. How is the tech driving top line metrics like customer acquisition or retention or margin expansion? Because those are really the types of impacts that you're looking for from a new technology or a new process. And time savings, those are nice and always a nice bonus, but usually time savings alone don't justify the entire investment. When you stand back and you look at software costs and the services costs and the internal resources and the potential impact on the business while you're putting the new technology in place, all of those things add up to a lot and usually are not covered by just simple time savings. And one example is if you think about Coupa or a spend management system, of course, you're going to get benefits on the AP processing side, fewer invoices, more efficiency there. But the real benefit from the technology comes from things like strategic sourcing, more contracted spend or more negotiated spend on contract, and better working capital management, with your accounts payable. And the value impact of those latter benefits all greatly outweighs probably 10x any time savings. So we really encourage our clients to think about those types of impacts over the most obvious ones around time savings and things of that nature.
Agree. The CFO needs to think bigger, but also to push others to think bigger. So think beyond, DPO, DSO, and in looking at the tools, think about, not only where you are today, but where are you going? So, for example, we look at the different AP automation tools out there and think back a little bit. 10 years ago, it was OCR. Now it's AP automation. Now some of those tools are moving to having, procurement on the front end of that. And I think as time goes on, there will be a more end-to-end approach with these tools. And I think the CFO's responsibility is to help anticipate, okay, where is the company going, and what can I do to enable that through the use of technology. And just to repeat myself a little bit, not that I'm going to have to replace in a couple of years, but that iterates with us or grows with us, such that we can expand without having to press a pause because finance can't keep up. Looking for those tools that offer the flexibility to help us do the analytics and the reporting. And one example of that would be just in looking at how we look at the business. So again, instead of finance looking at what has happened with the business, anticipating what are not only the metrics that we need to report on or that we need to predict, but what are all the tags and the dimensions that we need to be able to slice and dice the business in order to really understand it and to help use as part of the conversation in driving the alignment and the cooperation of our peers.
So effectively always getting to the why, right? So finance has done a very good job of looking backwards, and we can talk about the past and history all we want, but then what we want is get to the why so that we can understand and predict the future. And I think that's where finance lives in 3 time zones: in the past, the present, and the future.
Yes.
So that's fantastic. Something that we hear a lot often is, how can teams think about the total cost of ownership? And I'm not sure, Caleb, if Yvonne, if you've used that as a concept to both make decisions or communicate decisions to the business of, hey, have we really thought about this? Is not only the subscription fee to a platform, this is the resources that you need, the team, the onboarding, the implementation, so on and so forth. Is there anything that you can share with us around that?
Yeah, so total cost of ownership, I think, is becoming much more of a visible challenge now, given the economic conditions and the fact that many companies are being forced to tighten the belt, if you will. I think there's been a lot of, and Yvonne, you touched on this a little bit, proliferation of so many different solutions doing different things in the value chain for different processes. And I do expect there to be some consolidation there in the coming years, where it's like, hey, instead of paying for 10 different licenses for 10 different tools. Find one platform that's flexible enough that you can build it to suit your needs. As Yvonne mentioned, it can be molded to your business and grow with your business. And then you're not re-upping a bunch of annual subscription fees every year with a bunch of different providers, and then needing to hire specialists to service those as well.
Yes, for example, just going back to that AP automation tool and some of the questions you were asking earlier in this session, Max, about which could be the right tech stack. Well, I think that's a good example of looking at different providers for different things. So once we understand, what we're trying to solve, why we're trying to solve it, and what we're trying to, accomplish, we can evaluate better the different options available in the market. So, for example, in the AP automation, some are more catered maybe towards larger companies who want to ensure compliance or governance, and others maybe more concerned with volume, getting large volume of data through, thinking of some of the fintechs out there. And then others are maybe a plugin where it's an extension where to help companies maybe that haven't upgraded yet to an ERP, but need some analytical view into their data, and maybe they lack a BI. So I think it depends, where the business is in its journey, of course, where it is in terms of funding, but also, why does it need this tool? What does it need it to do? Are two of the paramount questions that have to be well evaluated and answered.
Love it. I love how everything keeps coming back to the what and the why. Something that I talk a lot about internally as well is, what is the MVP of the solution to the problem? And the MVP to the solution of every problem is not going to be often another system. It's going to be talking more to other teams, and then can we first build that MVP, validate solving the problem, and in fact, is it a real problem before we scale it? So now, switching gears a little bit, let's say you've done the job of deciding you need a new process or solution, you've validated it, you're onboarding a new vendor, and it's time to implement it. We know finance team needs to quarterback the rollout, but reality is, most finance teams are working overtime, and oftentimes the path forward to the successful implementation of something is not always clear. Caleb, what can you share on how finance teams balance the execution and enablement of a new process? And how have you seen this while working with your own customers?
Sure. So yeah, this is a situation that we see with all of our clients. It's a situation that I've experienced as well personally. There are never enough hours in the day to do everything that finance wants to do, right? So there's always that trade-off between where do you prioritize. A few levers that we've pulled, again, myself and with other clients as well. One is what we call a chopping block exercise. So very tactical. We get everyone on the team in a room. We go through what everybody is doing on a day-to-day basis, list out all the activities. And together we judge with finance leadership in the room too, to make sure that we have alignment there. What is high value and should be continued, and what is low value and should be cut? And it's not, oh, we're going to think about cutting it. No, we're going to stop. We're going to communicate and stop doing that today. And that can give a lot of time back. And for example, running a weekly report, that's a manual exercise for one business partner every single week. And maybe they're not even looking at it, or maybe they only need it quarterly. Those are types of things that can be flushed out with that exercise. Another suggestion, especially if you're changing the process anyways, is adjusting forecasting cadence. So sometimes weekly or monthly forecasting is not actually really providing that much incremental value. So scaling that back a little bit, even if it's even if it's temporary, can go a long way, give a lot of time back to the team. And then a third one is up-leveling processes. So especially for companies that are growing very quickly, they'll sometimes do things at a very granular level, which makes sense. Count every penny when they're growing. But at some point, sometimes it makes sense to zoom out, up-level those processes, and it saves you a bunch of time if you're thinking about complex allocations for close, for example. So those are a few levers or suggestions that we'll make for clients if they're facing that challenge, because it's almost always worth the time up front to really become familiar with technology and become familiar with the process so that the team can be more self-sufficient going forward, because that's where the true value is actually realized. The value is not realized just when you plug the system in and go live.
Caleb, you mentioned something about the chopping block exercise. Mm-hmm. How do you put this one in motion? And the reason why I ask is people have a hard time accepting sunk costs, right? So sort of we grow attached to our processes and our ways of doing things, and then letting go of them, especially in such a radical way of we're not doing this tomorrow, can be challenging. How have you seen this evolve and actually become successful? Because ruthless prioritization needs to be applied in everything we do.
Yeah, it's tough, and I think it takes a good deal of alignment and trust within the finance team, or if it's an FP&A team, for example, or finance and accounting. But literally, we just got into a room and we again put everything on a whiteboard. Nobody is accused, even leadership is doing it. And when you put everything out there and you look at it, usually it becomes pretty apparent what is important and what is not. And then it's natural, and leadership might have to run some air cover if someone is annoyed that something went away. But from what we've seen, usually those the things that get chopped, there's less downside on those in terms of impact than you would think.
Great, fantastic. And I mean, Yvonne, you've been able to navigate ruthless prioritization and then driving people towards goals, right? So during your career, you've been involved in multiple successful M&A deals, most recently at AIOPSGROUP and then BC. But then when it comes to implementing processes, an M&A deal always adds a completely different layer of complexity. What can you share from those experiences?
Well, I will piggyback a few things that Caleb said, but also toss in a few others that are particularly important when it comes to M&A and the post M&A integration. First and foremost, I think it takes understanding each other. So, while Caleb was saying, go in a room together and ask yourself, what's important, what do we need to focus on, what can we cut out? Understanding who the people are can be just as important as picking, say, the right solution, because if you don't have the engagement of the people, it's really difficult to put the right technology in motion. So understanding people's ways, their motivations, and linking, let's say, what you need them to do to the overall objectives and the strategy of the company is super important, because if people know the why, just to throw that one in there again, then they're much more likely to buy into the process and help you with the process than to resist that change and try to fall back to what's familiar. So as part of the honeymoon stage of the M&A, I think it's super important that the people get to know each other on a personal level as much as possible in a business context, and to be patient with each other, to understand cultural differences when those transactions happen across oceans, because we've seen sometimes that there can be some things lost in translation. But I think the paramount thing is helping everyone feel involved in the process, and making sure that they understand the why, so that you have the buy-in and the support to make that integration happen.
I love that. And I think this comes from a tip that I've seen has worked well in my experience, is never talking about finance updates or finance needs to do this. These are the business updates. This is what the business needs to accomplish. And then it's sort of drives that collective thinking of we are all part of this company. We want to make it thrive. And then we can come to the table understanding what we need to do. So before opening for some audience Q&A, we can switch gears and have some rapid fire questions line up. Let's start with the first one. So if you were to walk in to lead a new finance team or function, what work would you do to ensure that the must-have foundations are in place from day one? Caleb, Yvonne, whoever wants to go first can take this one.
Sure, I can take this one. So from a tech perspective, I think this was touched on a bit earlier. I'm probably first going to look at my source data. So my customer and sales data, my spend data, my HR data, I'm going to look to see if I have access to it first, if it's at an appropriate level of granularity, if there's any metadata attached to it that will help me tell a story. And also, as we've noted, do the source systems talk to each other? If I pull a sales order in NetSuite, can I match that against an opportunity in Salesforce and to the sales motion that was associated with it? That's where I'm going to start to make sure that I have some type of foundation that we can build on.
Yes, I agree. I think that it's really important early on to understand the ecosystem, because if you are going to influence, you need to understand how the different moving parts function together, why they're there, what purposes they serve, if they can be optimized. Because sometimes we may introduce a failure because we didn't consider something that was critical in the ecosystem. So I think having that overview of how the different pieces work together help you tailor, let's say, the right solution for the business, and also ensure the alignment amongst the team.
I love that on failure, which connects to the second rapid fire question. Can you share when you've made a mistake or implemented a solution that wasn't necessary or much less value adding that you thought it would be? And what did you learn from that experience? Yvonne, maybe if you want to kick us off with this one.
Sure. Yes, I have one that comes to mind. It was a commission system. And the idea was that, the company was growing. We had a very complex commission system in which it mattered, the currency of the transaction could be different than the currency of the payroll. And then there was a quota. And then there was is a new business existing, is it expansion? And so there were so many factors to take into consideration. We built an Excel that basically handled that, but we also said to ourselves, well, this isn't sustainable, so we have to find something in the market. So we evaluated some companies. We found one that basically did what our Excel spreadsheet did. But what we found was that it was so difficult let's not say difficult, it was so time consuming to maintain that it actually took longer than the Excel spreadsheet. And also from a usability perspective, it was terribly confusing to the people who were receiving the commissions. So in retrospect, I'm not sure, not going to a system it would have been better, but the particular system clearly was not the right fit for the company.
Yeah, I would start by saying that no solution is ever perfect. And part of using technology, I think, is embracing the 80-20 in some cases and the continuous improvement. I would say with a couple of clients more recently, given how fast the economy turned, and as Yvonne mentioned, everyone's trying to plan for where they think they're going to go, right? So there's a lot of optimism in the late 2010s, where companies are going to go. A lot of growth. Hey, we need to scale up and get ready to IPO within the next 2 to 3 years. And so they're going out and they're building pretty robust planning solutions, for example, and building out everything that they'll need to go public and do the external reporting and have the appropriate governance. And then, of course, COVID hits, the economy turns, and you end up in this place where we're like, oh, we built up a lot of things that we don't actually need right now, because the timeline for any type of going public might be now, instead of 1 or 2 years out, 3, 4, 5 years out. So that's not a problem. It's one of those sunk cost things where it's like, hey, we operated based on these assumptions. The circumstances have now changed, and then you have to go back and unwind a few things or set them aside and keep those until they're actually needed.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think we always have to go back to first principles thinking, and context might change, the economy might change, but we always need to ask ourselves, do I really need this today? Is it solving a problem that I have today, or is it nice to have because capital is cheap and I can layer on nice marketing? So last rapid fire question before we go on to the audience Q&A. We hinted at this earlier about the bundling or unbundling. What are your predictions on what the CFO office and the technology behind it will look like in 10 years? And maybe Caleb, you can start this one.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to pin down where technology will be, given how fast things are going now. I do think that the line between strategy, operations, and technology is going to continue to blur. and that will affect finance organizations. I think companies that use AI well, they're going to run more lean than we've ever seen before. And so I think that's going to kind of uproot a lot of benchmarks that have been in place for a long time. It's going to change the way that people work. And that will shift spend from headcount to compute or to technology solutions. So I think to try and stay on top of that wave, finance needs to embrace AI thoughtfully, right? They need to understand the data management side and the architecture side, which is 80% of the work when it comes to AI and machine learning. And they need to be hands-on. So even if technology solutions are getting their lower code, there still needs to be enough understanding of engineering to be dangerous with it and use those tools the right way.
I love how you finished to be dangerous with it. Yvonne, on your end, what are your predictions?
Similar, I would say. So I think that, as today we're seeing that AI is able to help, programmers with some basic code so that maybe they can, focus on maybe the larger problem at hand and leave some of the more, let's say, transactional code to AI or to ChatGPT. I think that we'll see some of that in finance as it relates to transaction processing. So more of the basic level, the predictable levels can be handed over, and we will start to see an emergence of a couple different types of technologies. The first one, I think, is that companies will try to be that more everything to their clients. So it's not just a CRM, but it's also helping out with the marketing campaigns, or so it's maybe some consolidation there, or it's not just as we mentioned earlier, AP automation tool, but now it's touching procurement. So I see that technologies will expand, let's say, their offerings to try to be a more one solution to fit wider spectrum, but also I see that some technologies will go excuse me one second, will sorry, I just lost my.
So we're talking about the technologies going from.
Yes, I just lost. Well,
no worries.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I just the more comprehensive solution offerings and just trying to have a deeper commitment with their customer base, I think, overall.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. We're getting some now questions from the audience, and I'll kick us off with the first one. So Caleb, you emphasized the significance of data. Would you consider API capabilities being one of the primary criteria when selecting a tool?
Yes, I think that interoperability with any new tool is very important. I do see a lot of companies, like I think 10 years ago, a lot of technology providers treated it more as an afterthought. And it's like, oh, those are data integrations. That's a very niche thing. But now they affect everyone. And so yeah, I think that becomes more of a core competency for any team. They need to understand how APIs work, how it provides them with the data that they need, and at least be able to direct a more, perhaps a specialist on what they need to do if they're building an API for internal purposes.
Thank you. And then this is leading to another question that we're getting from the audience is, are there any concerns that either of you have as CFO regarding data security? If so, what are your biggest problems now with data security and that you foresee in the future?
I think with, let's say, dark web and the ability for bad actors, let's say, to have access to great volumes of data about companies, it's becoming more prevalent that they try to infiltrate, let's say, into the company and maybe pretend to be an acquaintance or part of a transaction. I can say, recently with the acquisition of AIOPSGROUP, that there was a bad actor that tried to be part of Volantic and obtain some information. So I think, that's part of the dark side that we have to look out for as things continue to emerge.
Makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, you always have to aim for the best, but prepare for the worst. So given that, another question that we're getting in is, given that many ERP implementations fall short of success, what advice can you offer to ensure a successful rollout and management of that ERP? Yvonne, I know that you've gone through many and helped companies implement countless times an ERP. I don't know if you want to kick us off, or Caleb, if you have anything to add here as well.
Yeah, I think that one of the mistakes, let's say, that companies make is that they don't fully dedicate the people enough to the project, or they have the misconception that, well, we can handle it, we can put it on top of our workload, and inevitably what happens is they find out they can't, and then they're struggling, and in the worst case they find themselves with very dispersed information, and then they've gone from maybe a less than ideal situation to a worse situation. So I like to encourage, let's say, the behavior when it comes to system planning that I do with my personal finances, and that is to, whatever my estimate is or whatever my salary is, I'm going to live actually below that. So I'm going to say, okay, if I estimate that this project is going to take 20% of my time each week, no, it's not going to take 20% of your time of that. It's going to take much more. So either I need to be honest with myself and others, about what that commitment is, and then make sure that I have the space to operate in that environment. And if I don't, to recruit the resources that are going to be able to help me with that.
Wonderful. We have one last question before we wrap up this session. This one's coming from an audience member, and it's, how do you view truly transformative technologies that could significantly improve a company's performance but upend existing systems?
Yeah, I think what we've seen is actual platforms. So versus point solutions, not just enterprise software, but platforms on which you can build enterprise software, I think are very compelling. Because the thing is, when you're going and you're buying an out-of-the-box solution, you're not only buying the product and solutions that you need, you're buying a solution that meets the needs of 1,000 other customers that don't have anything to do with your business. So, and that's all kind of built into what you're paying for. So I think that platform solutions will be very interesting to watch, and those could consolidate a number of point solutions that are out there. Then the added benefit on top of that is that with AI, these large language models that are coming out, they're potentially game changing. But if your data is in a bunch of different places and not being intaken in the same place and structured in the right way, you're not going to get any benefit from those AI capabilities.
I'm glad this question was asked, because it's a refresher of what I lost my thought about earlier, which is going along fintechs and where they brought us through today. I think that the next evolution is in really global banking or global treasury management, because when we think about how banks are organized, it's still today like, when I was in university, I worked in a bank, and it was very regional, and it's still that way basically today. But I think that part of the fintech has planted the seeds, let's say, for the globalization of banking, and as more companies take their operations into different markets, and as VCs are putting, let's say, mandates on companies to have multi-geographical presence, it brings about the need for the companies to be able to manage their treasury across geolocations. And along with that, technology can be a good support in a good, let's say, way for a company to be able to manage its cash flow and to have a dashboard of what's happening across its entities.
Absolutely. I cannot agree enough there, especially as we're seeing global workforces also happen. So not only are you having companies expand globally, but also employing people everywhere. So it's a mindset of you're no longer a US company or a European company, you're a global company, and this means having operations in multiple places. It is now time to wrap up. Yvonne and Caleb, thank you so much for this insightful session. It has been a blast. Thank you everyone for joining us today and sharing your questions in the chat. And we hope to see you in another one of our CFO Day session. Have a great day.